Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Walker. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, obviously, the overarching case this episode was an interesting case because obviously it involves, a decorated cop named Monty who's actually nearing retirement. Which I should also quickly note, I think it's kind of interesting, because his name is Monty Shaw, if I'm not mistaken. So it's Monty, obviously a character in the 100, which Lindsay Morgan, who played Raven, was in, but also Shaw, she kind of dated her character dated a character named Shaw, and so I'm reading way too much into it, but it was something that crossed my mind. I was like, thought that was interesting. The moment they said Shaw, and I was like, oh, that's where that came into play, and then later on, it's like, oh, they were start calling him by his name Monty. I was like, oh, that's just interesting. Once again, reading too much into it, but nevertheless, basically it involves this dude, Enzo, ended up dying. It was a byproduct of the whole situation. Obviously it's apparently he killed this big time dude, Harlan. But it also turns out Enzo was part of this game. I forgot, was it I'm going to butcher the name. It was Vadios, I think was kind of the name. And so now it kind of looks like maybe he was back with them again, and that's what led to this whole situation. But obviously being confronted by his daughter Dahlia, which I was like, once again, another thing where I'm like, where do I recognize this actress from? And I think that the thing I ended up realizing what I recognize her from is she was the lead in the show Every Which Way. It was I believe that show's name. Yeah, it was a Nickelodeon show about witches. Interesting. I never watched the show. I think I remember seeing previews a long time ago, but only reason why it was kind of in my mind was because I saw one of my nieces watching the show last year, so I was like, oh, it's interesting how that ends up working, and put certain things back in your mind because you're like, oh, when you're watching a younger generation watch something that obviously you're not really aware of, but it's just it's only in my head. I probably would have never realized that if I had never seen my niece watching it last year. It's always interesting how stuff like that works. But regardless, she confronts Mickey about the whole situation, and because Mickey kind of got put on front because James is like, oh, hey, just smile, kind of just take. She didn't like that because she even talks about it with Trey later on, where it made her kind of feel me being the Mexican, lady ranger, it was just almost like she was used as a prop, which Trey tried to make her feel better about it by being you might feel a way about it, but think about it your perspective on it isn't what any girl that looks like you is going to feel that way, because it's hey, there's a woman up there who looks like me, who's a ranger, who takes down the bad guys. That's enough inspiration on its own. But Dahlia kind of made Mickey feel a certain way about it, because it's do your own homework, because for her it felt like a betrayal, because this is one of your people, you kind of betrayed us, if you're taking, and even she was talking about it, hearing Delia tell her that kind of made her feel like she was hearing her mom again, because that's why her and her mom have beef, because it's you're working with the people who kind of go out of their way to kind of go after us. You're essentially working with the enemy. You've become the enemy, which I'm sure, once again, that aspect of this whole situation is probably that storyline will probably come up in some shape or form. But because of all of that, it got Mickey thinking she's there's got to be more to this case, so she wants to kind of look into it a little off books. I mean, Monty's celebrated as being this, great cop and everything, so it's I don't want to kind of besmirch anything, so we're going to do this off books. And she brings it to Walker, and Walker's off books? Off books, my middle name, which I love the whole thing of him being no, I'm just kidding. It's actually Beauregard. What's yours? Because still trying to figure out her middle name situation. Because she actually met one of the unit that she belonged to before she became a ranger. Obviously, they know a lot more about her than Walker does, because he's trying to open up that moment, that dialogue between them, because he wants them to be on a better terms. Because obviously, his previous partner was James, so I think it's he wants that same relationship with Mickey, where it's just the more I know about you, the more we can build trust between each other. And obviously for Mickey, it's not a thing of it's not that I don't trust you, it's just I'm surrounded by so many white men who are in this position that it's she feels there's even more pressure on her as being the one Mexican, not just one Mexican, not just the one Mexican, but just like the one Mexican female on top of that, that I have to be extra careful because I might not get the second chance. So if I screw, that's always been her worry, that like this job and position she's fought so hard to get towards, it's like it could all be taken away from her just as easily, and it's like I can't screw up. So whereas everyone's held to a high standard, I got to be held to an even higher standard because I can't lose this, because I've opened a doorway, but who knows when that next, I'm helping pave the way for other people, but it's like, who knows if I screw this up, like if that other doorway, how long that door will stay open or whether it'll be closed behind me, so you can understand the pressure she's kind of under in that regard. So it's just like, especially with someone like Walker, who is kind of like a wild card in certain regards. Obviously it's a complicated match, but that's also what, feeds into this as well, because we end up finding out, like, obviously the family situation, Harlan, his wife, which CW connection wise, obviously Riverdale's on CW, but there's also Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which this is the original Aunt Z, who made an appearance, spoiler, on the final season of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Her and the OG Aunt Hilda. So I was like, hey, that's pretty dope. Once again, reading too much into things, but I was just like, oh, that's interesting. But it was really interesting kind of unpackaging that whole situation, because the whole thing was like, it turns out, talking to Dahlia, that Enzo was pretty tight with Harlan, but his name, Bob. Enzo and Bob were pretty tight, but none of the children nor the mom were interested in him. So like they looked at him as like, oh, he's trying to get something. What I also thought was really interesting is like the daughter was kind of like, oh, I have, last time I was at this party or whatever, and it was like 30,000 likes on Instagram. So next time you should, stop by. And she winks at Walker, and Walker's looking like, wait, what? And even the guy, the son be like, sure thing, Ranger Rick, which I don't know if it was meant to be that. I was like, is he calling him Ranger Rick just because for the alliteration, or is it because it's like, is that supposed to be like a Walking Dead wink? I'm assuming, because, granted, he was just, he's a sheriff, but I'm wondering if that's what they were referencing, like the whole Ranger Rick thing. Because that's the biggest, like, Rick in lexicon, in my opinion. Like, when you think Rick from Walking Dead. I mean, maybe that's not the case, but that's just the most, like I said, in the pop cultural lexicon, I feel like that's probably the most up there Rick currently, but I could be wrong. So that's why I don't know whether that was just, granted, it could have been a reference to something else, but I just, like I said, my mind immediately went to the Rick Grimes from The Walking Dead. But nevertheless, the case takes an interesting turn when, Mickey realizes, like, hey, don't Bob and Enzo look alike, and it's like, so that's an illegitimate son, which kind of plays a role in explaining why Bob was leaving everything to Enzo in his will. Apparently, he had also like recently changed everything, and we ended up ultimately finding out what that change was. Apparently, because I had a feeling like that, like the way they were setting the episode up, I was like, there's definitely no way like Monty isn't involved in this. But why would, like, I was like, was he going to get a piece of the pie? Which technically, I guess he was, but it's also because him and Bob's wife were having an affair. Bob found out about it, took his wife out of the, because also probably the thing of like, he probably took his kids out of the will too, because they were like, they're kind of shitty, I don't care. Because Enzo's a better, like, which is kind of sad at the end of the day, because it's like, oh yeah, like, your illegitimate son ended up being a better child than your own children. Maybe that's kind of, because also, I guess it's also because Enzo spent so much time it makes you wonder at what point in time did he find out. I don't think they ever really explained that in the episode. Like, was it over the time they were spending together? Was it more recently? Like, what was the happenstance in that regard? But nevertheless, luckily they were able to, take Monty down, because obviously it does present an interesting situation where, like, Mickey is bringing up the fact is because him being taken down like this, it will mean that all his cases will be opened up, which I'm curious whether they'll tackle that or not. Some shows in crime dramas and under circumstances like that kind of deal with the aftermath of that. I'm not sure if this show will. I mean, it'll be interesting if they do. Like, that could be like a story point later on. But obviously it's a complicated thing, because obviously there was that moment between James and Mickey where they were talking. She was like, yeah, you said you were going to shake the, he's like, yeah, shake the tree. But it's like, yeah, we kind of screwed this up, all inroads, but it's like, hey, all right, let's do it. So James is about handling things the right way, but at the same time, it's still just that complicated thing of like, oh. Also, that was interesting too that this is also the first episode apparently like they've ever Liam and her have officially met, because he introduced him. It's like, oh yeah, I'm William, but Liam, everyone calls me Liam, and it's like, yeah, you should call me Liam because you're stuck with my knucklehead brother. And it's like, she's like, I like him. It's like, oh, of course you do, because both of you love busting, because they both love busting Walker's chops. But nevertheless, I also do appreciate that he learned so much about Mickey this episode because of his like it's like, how do you know all this stuff? It's like, it's like Trey, because he even said the thing at the beginning of the episode. It's like, so how are things between you and Trey? It's like, he must be asking all kinds of questions about me. It's like, nope, he hasn't even brought you up once, which I wonder, is that true or not? But I like the stuff between them this episode too, Trey and Mickey, the whole situation with obviously, like, her, for one, we found out how much of a really talented artist she is. And also the fact is that, like, she made a whole comic book, based on, someone that looks like her, as she said, part Selma Hayek, part Wonder Woman, kind of to be an inspiration for her. And he even, like, framed it later on. It's like, you drew and dreamed of becoming a superhero. You wanted a superhero, someone to look up to, and you became that hero, So kind of just never forget that. I just thought that was a beautiful moment, kind of continuation in their story. Some other aspects in this episode. Well, there's the whole situation with God, I'm blanking. Stella, sorry. And obviously her community service, but it took her into like a kind of a taking care of. She was working at a stable, but it's also like this stable is also where a lot of prisoners kind of get forced to go to. So it's like to work out of. So it's like, hey, I want you just to kind of be careful around that area. And she ends up meeting this dude Trevor, which obviously it seems like things are hitting off there. But also it's a complicated thing of like, yeah, she's suffering like the consequences for her actions, but she's getting the mild end of it, whereas like Belle is suffering the whole kit and caboodle situation, because like because obviously she's adamant about like, hey, we got to help them out, especially because she overheard her dad and Liam talk about the fact is that Belle's family situation is not good. They are on ICE's radar, so it is a situation that it's like Belle is a citizen, so she won't be affected by this, but they have a good chance of being deported. Like, if anything happens because of all of this, like, they will be keeping an eye on you. So, like, there's not so much that Liam can do. But for Stella, she's just like, I want to do what we got to do something. We have to do more. And then the mom, like Belle's mom, kind of snaps and is like, just stay out of trouble. And she's like, yes, ma'am, because she realizes like she's so adamant about fixing this because she dragged Belle into all of this, which she tries to make things up to Belle later on because talking to Trevor, he's like, at least don't try to pretend like it isn't happening, like kind of embrace it, because it's like, hey, like it's going to at least take some of the sting away, because just dancing around it isn't going to do anything. Which her, Belle's like, well, you're going to owe me like 10 more. She's like, oh, I thought you were joking, huh? But it's like, she's like, no, I'm serious. But it's like, it's still joking, but I'm still like, I don't think their friendship's going to be the same. Maybe this is like a, hey, it's all good. Because she was like, can I go in and apologize? She said, no, it's all good. It's like, probably your parents, no matter what, probably aren't going to be too thrilled with Stella, because Stella kind of blew up their situation. Granted, it was just, she was going through something, and obviously she was rebelling, and your daughter kind of got caught in a crossfare, and now you kind of have as well. But it's still the thing of like, it kind of sucks. I'm curious. It seems like she was being like, nah, it's all good. But I'm like, is it though? That is the question. Like, I think this circumstance might change their relationship. And speaking of relationships, so you see kind of that dynamic has shifted all around. Because last episode hinted towards like things between Walker and Liam's mom and dad. And it turns out what kind of like that there's some stuff there, because in a moment, like obviously not Gary, but Stan was over and everything. And he had brought up this whole, it's like, oh, how is Walker doing? And then Walker's dad was like, yeah, no man gets over losing his wife. And he had this look about him and he kind of left. And then we kind of find out a little bit later on what that was about. Because even like, oh, Stan was like, hey, you hadn't been over. Gary's been asking about you. Turns out there was a thing, like, she kind of had an affair. Apparently, like, they were having a rough patch. It seems like I think it was already there, but I think it got worse after Emily died. And so it puts Walker in this complicated thing because I think like he probably, it's that thing of like, you're probably not naive to think like, hey, your parents have the perfect marriage, but you probably, knowing that they went through a rough patch and it's like, because he's the last one to know about it. Granted, who knows if the kids know or not, but Liam knew. And obviously he ends up confronting his mom about it later on, like, did dad know? And it seems like his dad does. I think that's where that adds more aspects to the whole thing last episode where he was like, I miss you. And she's like, yeah, I miss you. I miss you too, So now it kind of adds, it's them kind of dancing around it, trying to find their, like everyone's, Walker's trying to move forward and everything. And they're trying to do the same thing, but it's still that just kind of like awkward space of just like, how do we move forward from here? What does that look like? That whole situation. So I just thought that was kind of a fascinating like development in their story. And I thought was interesting though, is that she was like, you haven't told the kids everything about your, it's like, we're still the parents in this situation. So like, we don't have to really answer one of our sons about our whole situation, but it's like, it's not like you told the kids everything about you and Emily, which I'm wondering, like, did they have their issues or something? Is that what that's kind of insinuating? Or I don't know. I wonder what she was getting at. Because a development in this episode is August was going through his dad's old stuff, but his dad was like, no, stuff from a case, don't worry about it. But August ended up getting some photos developed, and one showed Walker pretty close to a lady, and the lady wasn't his mom, and that kind of sent him a little spiraling because now, he even asked his grandma about, it's like, is dad happy? Because in his mind, it's like, you haven't been that happy the entire time you've been back. And it's a complicated thing because it's like, yes, he's happy to be back with his kids, but sadly, it is also that much more of a reminder of Emily's gone. It's that much, it hits you that hard that it's like, he's like, yes, I am happy. I'm just not always good at showing it. I mean, he came back and so much has changed while he was gone. And he even talks about, I don't want to bring up whatever that was in the past. It's like, I got close to this particular lady because it was part of like the gang I was like kind of undercover dealing with, but it's like, it's in the past. I don't want to deal with it. I knew that wasn't going to be the case considering that wasn't going to be easy considering like we know that August texted her pretending to be Walker, which obviously not, what was his name? His fake name, was it Doug? So I was like, yeah, that's good. August inadvertently trying to dig up the past ended up making it rear its ugly head. So now Walker's got to deal with that. And it deals with some stuff of like, it's probably a situation of he did get close to her, but it was in a situation where like, not only was he undercover, but also it was sometime after losing Emily, so he was probably angry and lost and kind of diving into this case. I mean, I'm sure that probably helped actually going undercover. Being someone else kind of gave him a little bit of an escape from his problems. So, and that's probably going to cause issues because it's going to be like, oh, like you led this whole other life while we were waiting for you. Like, he's just getting back on better terms with Stella and August, that I think that could cause a snafu in itself. I mean, once again, whatever issues came up about that case that I guess like he may have gotten close to her and once again he got to be someone else, and it's just like letting that go probably wasn't always the easiest thing, and now potentially having to dive back into that like I said, August inadvertently opened up a whole can of worms. Snooping into some, I mean, to be fair, he was like, yeah, I thought I was going to find pictures of you and mom, because he even brings up something. He's like, why don't we have any pictures of your mom? It's like, your mom was the family photographer, so she was never in, that's why we barely have any photos of her. But it's like, hey, you can be the new family, photographer. I know you're kind of figuring this whole thing out, but it's just like, ugh. What that necessarily looks like going forward is going to be interesting. Like what, because I think next episode will give us really good insight into that case Walker was working on for 11 months. Because, I'm sure he jumped onto it just to kind of get away with the Emily thing. Which, speaking of Emily, what was interesting though is for whatever reason, I guess talking about her that episode, because it turns out, well, he had brought up the fact is he thought it was interesting that Enzo had gotten arrested so fast. It's like, well, yeah, you were messing with the sheriff, so that probably gets happened. It's like, yeah, same thing happened with the dude that killed Emily. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry, but, Walker's like, no, it's good. But it's like, I guess that kind of made him go, I wonder why, the dude that killed, like, it's because it's not like Walker was a sheriff, but I guess it's because it's like, hey, you're a ranger, but still, like, why would that? And I guess maybe that's why he was looking into it, but then Because he never really explained why he was looking into that in the first place. Maybe Walker's questions finally got to him and it was like, oh, let me look into this, you know? Maybe that's why it's been on his mind or something. But lo and behold, like, he ends up being like, whoa, like, he also found out that someone else had been looking into some stuff, and it was James. And even he was like, why is James looking into this, considering the fact is that he told Walker to back away from this? So either there's some deeper part to this that James is trying to keep Walker from getting involved in, maybe, or maybe Walker asking these questions made him go, oh, I want to check this out. Those are me being optimistic. The pessimistic side of me is like, maybe Walker's old partner might not be as clean cut as I think that might be the direction they'll head down first, but then be like, no, he's actually clear cut. Like, he was maybe trying to protect Walker in some shape or form, because Walker being back made him go, yeah. Because it might flow with what happened this episode, because, you know, she was like, Mickey was like, thanks for having my back, partner. And, you know, he's like, you know, she's like, for believing me. And he's like, I didn't believe you. I trusted you. And, you know, that's when your partner has a strong gut feeling about something, you go with it. And part of me wonders, did James kind of have a similar thing, you know? So we'll see kind of where that potentially goes. Because obviously, like I brought up, like, the trailers hint to it, but you can definitely feel like there was a lot more to Emily's death. It isn't just going to be some tragedy. It's kind of, oh, it is what it is. But it's like, there's definitely more to it. I'm still wondering whether there's going to be more with Jerry or not, like whether she has a bigger role in it or not, whether she's kind of covering up some stuff. Like, that's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.